You knew something wasn't right, even when everything looked calm on the surface. Your heart felt the misalignment before words ever confirmed it. When they chose to walk away, it didn't feel like rejection. It felt unfinished, not because you needed them, but because something true was left unspoken. You didn't imagine the connection. You didn't misread the depth. Your intuition was warning you long before the silence arrived. Most videos will tell you that when someone leaves, they move on and forget. That silence means peace. That distance means clarity. But that version of the story only applies when the decision was aligned with the heart. This video is different, because sometimes the person who walks away isn't strong. They're conflicted. They choose what looks right instead of what feels true. Logic over intuition, safety over depth, approval over authenticity. And when that happens, the pain doesn't disappear. It turns inward. What you're feeling now, the quiet, the emotional distance, the strange sense that something is unresolved, isn't imaginary. It's the emotional echo of a choice made against the self. This video isn't about hoping they come back. It isn't about waiting or decoding signs. It's about understanding what happens inside someone when they silence their own truth, and why that inner conflict eventually becomes heavier than the relationship they walked away from. If you've ever felt confused by someone's silence, if you've questioned whether your intuition was wrong, this message exists to tell you something clearly. You didn't lose clarity. You listened to it. And now, the consequences of that decision are unfolding. Not in your life, but in theirs. One, when a decision makes sense, but breaks something inside. When someone makes a choice that goes against their intuition, it doesn't hurt immediately. At first, it feels like relief. They tell themselves they did the right thing, that they were being mature, that walking away was logical, necessary, even brave. But intuition doesn't argue, it waits. And over time, that ignored inner voice begins to surface, not as words, but as discomfort. This is why their own decision is hurting them right now. Because choices made from logic alone require constant emotional effort to maintain. They must keep convincing themselves, keep staying busy, keep moving forward without looking back. And that is exhausting. Internally, they are split. One part of them follows the decision. The other part quietly mourns what felt real. This inner division drains emotional energy. It's why their presence feels inconsistent, why they seem distant, distracted, or unusually quiet. They didn't lose you and feel fine. They lost alignment with themselves, and that loss shows up later, in moments of emptiness, restlessness, and a sense that something meaningful was left unresolved. Your intuition recognized this conflict early. You felt the hesitation in their energy. You sensed the emotional resistance behind their words. You weren't imagining it. People don't suffer because they miss someone. They suffer because they abandoned a truth they weren't ready to face. And the pain they feel now isn't punishment, it's feedback. Feedback from the self that was ignored. That's why silence doesn't feel peaceful on their side. It feels heavy, because intuition can be delayed, but it cannot be silenced forever. 2. Why they hide what they're feeling instead of admitting regret. Admitting regret is one of the hardest emotional acts a person can face, because regret doesn't just question a decision, it questions identity. To admit they chose wrong would mean confronting the version of themselves who believed they were being rational, strong, or emotionally disciplined. It would mean accepting that logic led them away from something real, so instead of turning inward, they turn away. They stay busy, they fill their schedule. They avoid stillness because stillness gives intuition a voice. This is why their silence isn't calm. It's guarded. They avoid reaching out not because they don't care, but because contact would open the door to truths they're not ready to sit with. Truths like, I felt more alive there than I do now. I ignored something important. Avoidance feels easier than vulnerability. It allows them to delay accountability without fully confronting loss. But avoidance is not healing, it's postponement. Emotionally, this creates pressure. Because unprocessed feelings don't disappear. They reorganize themselves as restlessness, distraction, or quiet dissatisfaction. They may appear composed, even detached, but inside, there's a low-level ache they can't name. This is why their energy feels inconsistent to you. Some days distant, some days warm, some days strangely nostalgic. You're sensing the internal conflict, not confusion about you, but conflict within themselves. And this is important for you to understand. Their silence is not clarity, it's containment. They are holding themselves together by refusing to look directly at what they feel. But that balance doesn't last, because suppressed intuition always returns, not loudly, but persistently. And when it does, it doesn't ask permission. 3. The emotional consequences. Time can't erase. There is a comforting myth people tell themselves after making a difficult decision, that time will soften it, that distance will dull the feeling, that moving forward will eventually make the past irrelevant. But emotional truth doesn't work that way. Time doesn't erase what was real, it removes distractions. As days pass, the urgency of the decision fades, and what remains is comparison, not deliberate comparison, but emotional contrast. New conversations feel lighter, easier, yet strangely empty. New connections may look promising, but they don't settle the same way in the body. There's laughter but not resonance, interest but not depth. And slowly, a quiet realization begins to form. Something meaningful is missing. This is when regret becomes unavoidable. Not dramatic regret, not the kind that announces itself, but the subtle, persistent awareness that they walked away from something that aligned them emotionally, even if it complicated them logically. Moments that once felt ordinary with you now feel rare elsewhere, being understood, being emotionally seen, feeling safe without pretending. And here's the painful part they don't share with anyone. They begin to miss not just you, but who they were when they were with you. That version of themselves felt more honest, more open, more alive. This is why their pain deepens over time instead of fading, because they aren't grieving a person. They're grieving an alignment they can't recreate, and no amount of moving on fixes that. Time doesn't punish them. It clarifies. It shows them that walking away didn't end the feeling, it only postponed the reckoning. 4. What this means for you, and why it was never your burden to carry. Understanding someone's inner struggle can feel dangerous, because empathy, when unchecked, often turns into self-abandonment. You may look at their silence, their distance, their confusion, and instinctively want to soften it, explain it, wait it out. But here is the truth this stage is meant to teach you. Their pain is not your responsibility. You didn't cause their internal conflict. You didn't pressure their decision. You didn't fail to make yourself clear. They made a choice, and every choice carries its own emotional consequence. Your role in their life was never to rescue them from that consequence. Your role was to be real enough to awaken something inside them, and you did. That's why this connection lingers in their emotional memory. That's why distance hasn't erased it. That's why silence feels heavy instead of clean. But awareness does not equal obligation. You don't owe patience to someone who chose certainty over truth. You don't owe availability to someone still avoiding their own intuition. This chapter isn't about proving your worth, it's about honoring it. Because the moment you stop waiting for them to catch up emotionally, something shifts inside you. You regain your center. Your intuition grows quieter, not because it's gone, but because it's no longer warning you. And that peace, that's alignment returning to you. You were never meant to chase clarity. You were meant to trust it. 5. The moment the truth finally reaches them. There is a moment that comes quietly, not during a breakup, not during an argument, not even when they miss you the most. It comes when distraction no longer works, when they've stayed busy long enough, when new routines feel repetitive, when silence stops feeling like relief and starts feeling like exposure. That's when the truth reaches them. They realize their pain isn't coming from losing you. It's coming from abandoning themselves when they chose against their intuition. They see it clearly then. How they silenced a part of themselves that felt alive, connected, real. How they chose comfort over alignment. How they walked away not from a person, but from a version of themselves they haven't been able to find again. This realization doesn't always lead them back to you, and that's important, because lessons aren't meant to be undone, they're meant to be integrated. You didn't enter their life to stay forever, you entered to wake something up. And once someone becomes aware of what they ignored, they are never the same again. They may grow quieter, more reflective, more honest with themselves. But whether they return or not, the truth you represented stays with them. You were not a mistake. You were a mirror. And mirrors don't chase, they reveal. If you're watching this with a heavy chest and a quiet understanding, I want you to know something gently, but clearly. You didn't imagine the connection. You didn't exaggerate the depth. You didn't love too much. You listened. Your intuition saw what their logic tried to override, and even though it hurt, you stayed aligned with yourself. That matters more than being chosen. Sometimes people leave not because love wasn't real, but because it required a version of themselves they weren't ready to become, and that is not a reflection of your worth. You were the moment clarity knocked on their door. What they chose to do with it was never yours to control. Now, the work is softer. To stop carrying their unresolved emotions, to stop waiting for their awareness to arrive, to trust that your intuition didn't lead you into loss. It led you back to yourself. And that is always the beginning of something better. If this resonated with something you couldn't explain but always felt, comment, "I trust my intuition" below. Let it be an anchor. If this helped you release a weight you've been carrying quietly, like this video, so it reaches someone else who needs the same clarity. And subscribe if you're ready for content that doesn't manipulate emotions, but honors them.